The caterhamracer.com Winter Euro Series is sponsored by DPR Motorsport, your competitive advantage. By FPZERO Simulators, providing professional grade simulators for your home and our drivers. And by just Add Lightness, high performance LED lights and accessories for the Caterham 7. We're also supported by Design and Display Structures and Darren Burke, Performance Driver Coach. So we now get closer towards crunch time in this, the off-season based caterhamracer.com Winter Euro Series, a season which is simply for those drivers that want to shake off some of the potential race rustiness, having not raced at least now for a good few weeks in real life and in the sim. It's now a chance for these guys to have one final blast in 2020 before taking over to a brand new year. For some, it was certainly a blessing in disguise, leaving 2020 behind. Others, it's a chance for them to possibly steal some extra glory before a new year comes in. So we've had the 4 heats in the Euro Series. Now there's just one more main run of racing to go before we move into the grand final next week. This is the Last Chance Saloon. We've raced at Brands Hatch, at Zolder, at Estoril, and at Zandvoort, and we've confirmed the first 12 cars that will start the final at the Nürburgring next week, but there are still 6 more places up for grabs, and that is where tonight's racing comes into play. Scott Woodwiss and Chris Hutchinson back in the box once again. And Chris, for those of you who might be familiar with races such as, for example, the Formula Ford Festival, where they have the Last Chance at a repechage race, this is pretty much our own version of that. This is pretty much as it says on the tin. Top 6 in this race, regardless of who they are, they will be the last 6 cars on the grid. And essentially, the rule is as simple as that. If you're in the top 6, you get an automatic spot at the back of the grid for the grand final. For 7th downwards, doesn't matter by an inch or a mile, to borrow Dom's slight phrase from Fast and Furious, doesn't matter at all. If you're 7th, you ain't getting on that final grid. So literally, this is really a case of everyone is trying that hard to race. And if you look at the entry list, there are some names who haven't popped up all season, but are certainly those that you would expect to be up towards the top 6, to steal them right at the death.
Yep, so good evening everybody, welcome to the latest broadcast, and yeah, exactly as you said, so anyone who has already got their qualification spot for the grand final next week is not actually entered tonight, so they are not in this race, they're not playing interference or anything, they don't figure. It's literally all the people that are left wanting to get that qualification spot, and there are lots of them this evening. We have 23 people on the grid this evening, all looking to get those top spots, but as you say, if you're not in the top 6, then you ain't going to that grand final. So we should see some really good racing, I think, at the top of the field. And for the broadcast, we get some of the names that traditionally are racing on our B grid, which is off broadcast. Some of the slightly slower drivers getting their kind of moment to shine, and it'd be great to see how they all get on as well.
Yeah, no doubts about that. We're currently into the qualifying session at the moment to decide the grid. 25-minute Last Chance Saloon race here at the Circuit de Catalunya in Spain, and the pre-circuit that we currently have at the moment, of course, is at the moment 2.893 miles. Of course, it is the home, as we mentioned, of the Spanish Grand Prix in Formula 1. It's also hosted races such as the SRO GT World Challenge races. They've also had MotoGP race here a few times, so it's a very prominent circuit, and one which is certainly a favourite amongst F1 teams, because they usually come here every winter to test and to use its variety of different corners to really put the cars through their paces. It really is a circuit where pretty much any kind of corner you can think of, Barcelona de Catalunya kind of tends to have it available to anyone that wants to use it. So a nice little mix of cars and mix of different layouts the drivers can pick from. But looking at our entry course for this tonight, as you absolutely rightfully mentioned on that one, Chris, if you look at the drivers, there are some that are definitely very familiar to those who've been watching us for a while, particularly in many cases, I think, Chris. One very noticeable name is the man who's currently in 4th. I'm not sure if we've heard him at all or not, but some chap called Jaroslav Cherny, who I think, if we're to be believed, Chris, he's a little bit good in these cars.
He's a little bit good in these cars, and he's been away all season and just waited to this Last Chance Saloon. So he, like everyone else, just has one 25-minute race this evening with damage on. So there is an element of peril. I know he's been busy with other life things going on at the moment, so that have sort of kept him away from the track. And yeah, it's good to see him back here. And I'm sure all the other drivers sort of let out a bit of a groan, because you would expect him to come along here, and he, to qualify. However, having said that, he is only in 4th at the moment, and Paul Ferniehoff, currently out in front, has been laying down some pretty blistering times. So the kind of times we're looking for tonight, anything in the 205s is a brilliant time. A low 205 is spectacular, and we've seen in sort of pre-testing, 205.3 is kind of the maximum we've seen. So I wonder whether anyone's going to be able to break that kind of time. It's hard to be consistent around here. You'll see the cars losing the rear end quite regularly, and the green sort of AstroTurf on this track is extremely slippery. So if you see drivers going out there, we could well see spins across the field and all sorts of carnage going on. It's certainly hard to keep these things pointing in the straight line.
That was me thinking that the AstroTurf would actually give you more grip rather than less of it, but in many cases, these guys will struggle on with as much or little grip as they can have at their disposal. As we see Paul Ferniehoff is currently second quickest. As we talk about Journey, he has popped to the top of the times with a 2 minutes 5.426. Ferniehoff second. Andy Parker's up to third quickest with a great effort. Mark Bennett, he was agonisingly close to a decent result to get himself into that top 3 last time. He's got some work to do. Currently with 4th quickest time. Quickest is Tom Willis, as we said, this year's Academy Motorsport champion, a two-time champion on the bounce now, having won not just the Academy in 2019 in his group, but also the Motorsport Championship, both times beating McConaughey, which I'm sure that Blair is absolutely delighted about, and he'll have to come back next year to try and make it 2-1 if he can in the 270R Championship. I should mention very quickly, of course, the cars they're in are the 420R spec Caterhams, rather than the Academy cars that they've had over the last few rounds. And again, this will be another night, Chris, won't it, where you will have some drivers that will use this at night to place their strengths, because we've talked about before several times, some drivers openly favour the Caterham Academy car, and they do better because it's lower power, less grip, and they're able to use the car a lot more and its drivability in that way. Whereas the 420R, again, other drivers prefer that. They prefer the amount of grip it offers. It's like twitchiness, the speed, the lightweight. So there are going to be differences in visibility based on the car that they prefer to use, particularly tonight watching this race, as we see James Wingfield getting a little sideways crossed up out of the Seat corner. But in many cases, I think Jaroslav Cherny, this is certainly a car that he's very familiar with, a car that he quite likes. He does openly prefer it, if I'm correct, over the Academy car. So in many cases, it's he was quick anyway, but at the same time, to be top of the times where he is no surprise. I think what's maybe surprising more about this, Chris, is the fact that he's not gone provisional pole by as big a margin as maybe would have expected. Guys like Paul Ferniehoff, and particularly Andy Parker and Mark Bennett and Tom Willis, they're still hovering within sort of roughly half a second or so. They're not allowing him to pull a massive second advantage and terrorise the rest of the field with that amount of pace. They're keeping him as long as they can do, even though it is only a qualifying session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think overall and in general, the whole field is closing up, as you'd expect. As the experience goes up of everyone, and they get more and more used to sim driving, the gaps and deltas come down, and you can see Paul's now even closer still, so he's now within 0.2 of a second of that lap time. And like I say, we've seen him in pre-quali setting 205.3, so certainly the time is not out of reach, and we shall keep with eager anticipation in the next 4 minutes, where the people like Ferniehoff and Bennett's also been putting in some great lap times, and also Arnell has as well, although Arnell's sort of further down than we might expect, so he's currently in 8th place. I was expecting to see him sort of firmly embedded in that top 4, so we'll see where Arnell gets to by the end of the session as well.
Yeah, we've still got roughly about 3.5 minutes to go in the session before we decide for definite who will be starting where in the grid. Ben Buckley looks like he's moved up to 10th position. There's some other names on the grid which to some drivers will be quite familiar, and some that might not be. One of them, which is this man, who's James Moon. Now, he is a new driver, particularly in terms of the caterhamracer.com challenge, but not just that. He is also a driver to watch out for in terms of real-life racing, because according to his bio and caterhamracer.com, he's a London-based lawyer taking a break, 2 young children and 3 cats, and he's having owned various nice road cars but limited track time experience. He decided to sign up for next year's Academy, so it's another driver who is taking the plunge into Academy next year, and we look forward to seeing James on the road as well. Other drivers that have managed to make a jump: Ben Buckley, good to see him back on the grid after he's had a bit of an extended break. We've got Adam Cottrell on the grid as well, who is the youngster of the 150 grads in Caterham Graduates. He joined for the 2020 season at a 16 to a 310R. he's actually done quite a decent season this year. He had 3 second-place trophies from Alton Park and Stetson for a good season. Before that, he was racing 5 years in Rotax Junior Karts and 2 years in sim racing with the ILR F1 League. So a couple of new drivers in there as well, but more alongside that, experienced drivers. You've got Emil Jasenic, who's been racing quite regularly. Andy Lees is back in there as well. He's been racing for the Road Sports in the 270s. James Wingfield, who's been up there with 310Rs. Paul Hawker's back as well. Mark Lipitsky's also back in there too. Jim Erland, Jay Shepherd, who is more known these days for racing Fun Cup cars, but dips into caterhams again every now and again, and particularly in the esports side of it. And also Stephen Boyle's on the grid amongst others. So it is nice to see 1 or 2 new faces alongside some others that haven't been around for a while. And it's interesting what a last chance race with the last 6 races, well, the first 6 spots are keep a place in the grand final. It's interesting who it tends to bring out the woodwork if they've got a free evening and fancy doing an extra couple of bit of racing this time next week. Yeah,
look what Wingfield's just done. He has just pumped himself straight into second place, only 7/100ths of a second behind Cherney's time, and that's a little bit of that's come out of. He's been kind of firmly in the top 10, but that really is a mega lap by Wingfield there to pull that one out of the bag. We've seen him in the races a little bit inconsistent and dropping back slightly. So again, let's watch for him, see whether he can hold it all together today, because we know that he's got the pace. It's just whether he can hold it together for 25 minutes, which is no mean feat, as we've seen over these preceding races. There's some drivers who start very strongly, but then as we get to the 20-minute mark, they start making mistakes and drifting off track.
I think also what will be quite interesting is that have we had some of the regulars that are racing in this 420R cars back in again for qualifying in terms of their pace. It would have been intriguing to see where he would have slotted in between the likes of Christian Zaruta and David Rowe and Steve McMaster and others who are quite high up in the mix in there too. Here is Mark Bennett, who's currently sat in 5th position on the grid as we come towards the end of his qualifying, getting held up there by Amber Jasenic's not going to help him either. And Bennett can take some comfort in the fact that Jasenic is 2 places behind him at the moment as they come towards the end of the session. Jasenic's currently sat 7th, but trying to do something about it to move up into 5th. Here is Tom Willis, now a 2-time champion in caterhams and real life on the bounce, and he was one of a few drivers who took part in what was a very well put together virtual style Caterham Motorsport Awards presentation, which was all sort of filmed and edited post-production and put together, and a fine job actually by I think not just Hayfisher but also as well both Simon Lambert and Kirsty Darren for putting on a great show, and also to get some of the special guests involved to hand out some of the trophies as well. And of course they had Graham, the Caterham CEO, where he was also making his own jokes at the same time. And so of course he'll be back out in the 7 UK cars, which is looking very exciting. We get it all the time as well, because Craig Graham will be one of several drivers who are moving into a 420R, one of which is kind of virtually sat beside me in the commentary box. Of course, I think you may have your one initial test session at Donington in the wet, Chris, but you're of course now going to be joining the 7 UK ranks after your little couple of years sabbatical. I know you're definitely looking forward to getting back onto the grid for real life anyway. But the fact we've now got lots more caliber drivers coming in, lots more great drivers coming in, and more great developments happening with the 7 UK Championship. Not to use the pun at all given the time of the year, but you must feel like a kid at Christmas knowing what's coming next year with the new car that you've got and the new developments for the series coming in. It's going to make it even more exciting and competitive than it already has been in previous years.
As they say, racing's a lot of waiting, and this is what we are in, this long period of waiting at the moment. And it comes frustrating it kind of never gets easier. Paul, funny enough, losing the rear end, then he was on a good lap up until this point. But yeah, it never gets easier. The time never seems to shrink. You're always waiting for that next session, as we see Paul abandoning that lap. It looks like most people are now finished. I can't wait to get going. I can't wait to have all the new kit on the cars, slick tyres and whatnot, and all the learning that's going to come involved in that. And I should be running with DPR Motorsport through the season, and it's going to be there's a lot of learning to be had over the year. I don't think it's going to be just jump in and fly to the top of the times, but that's what I'll be aiming to do at some point.
Is your heart going to sink if you look at the entry list and see Jay Byrne at the top of it? Because it's probably going to be like, oh no, not again. I thought we got rid of him after 2 seasons.
I think it's good to race against the best, so why not have a go against the best? That's what I say.
In order to be the best, you've got to beat the best. And at the moment, the best in qualifying, at least for tonight's Last Chance Saloon, as we head to we have the checker flag on the session, is Jaroslav Cherny. Should be to kind of no one's surprise, given how his pace is overall. But he is currently on pole position. In fact, it will be on pole position for the 25-minute Last Chance Saloon race. But it's the drivers right behind him that might cause even a bit more of a surprise, because second fastest, one of his best results in qualifying in a caterhamracer.com event, is James Wingfield. He was only 71 1,000ths of a second away from poleman Cherny at the front. Paul Fernerhuff and Andy Parker with some great efforts there to put himself on the second row of the grid. Tom Willis, on his first appearance in the season, also will start fifth alongside Mark Bennett, who will be hoping to make up the heartache of last time out. 7th place, which was Zandvoort. 7th place at Emil Jasethings. 8th for Steve Arnell. 9th for Mark Rodman. And 10th for Ben Buckley. Complete the top 10 for starters in this slightly expanded grid. 7th will be Jay Shepherd with the Alan Curtis. Jim Earlham and Andy Lee's coming next in the top 14. Philip Clark rounds out with top 15 drivers, ahead of Adam Cottrell, Stephen Boyles, Mike Hilton, Gavin Bolton, and Mark Lipitsky. And the last couple of cars on the grid should be in 21st position. If we do get that far, we do. It's James Moon and then Paul Hawker. And then the other car we might possibly have expected was Graham Hopkins. But looks as though I'm afraid he will not take the start due to one reason or another. So, 22 Caterham 420Rs for their last race before they decide goes into the grand final. Of course, the order they went into the grand final that doesn't determine any kind of grid at all. It's simply just which ones went through which way. And as we say, no one who's already qualified, none of those 12 drivers are in this race, so it gives a few extra drivers a bit more of a chance to take the spotlight. But we see the likes of, say, Paul Fernerhuff, particularly Jaroslav Cherny on the grid. Chris, anyone's hopes of possibly trying to get a race victory, again, depending on what happens in this next 25 minutes, might have been scuppered. But as we know, anything can happen in motorsport, and particularly sim racing, as we've discovered over this season, in the last few weeks in the Euro Winter Series. It usually does happen right when we least expect it.
Yeah, absolutely. And 25 minutes is a long time. And this is a long run into turn one. And it's not easy to get all the feel through there, especially when you've got 23 cars or 22 or 23 cars trying to pile on in there. As the lights come up, we're going to find out how it's going to go tonight.
So, 6 final spots into the grand final to settle, but who will get them? Literally, finish in the top 6 and you're safe. Let's see who gets the victory in the Last Chance Saloon here at Circuit de Barcelona, Catalonia. Lights are out and we go racing down towards turn 1. It's a nice, clean, even start from the first few rows as they charge down towards the first corner at Elf. This is where it's going to be pretty key here. Which position do you put yourself into? Which piece of track do you go for to position yourself for that sprint and to stand on to the brakes? They're all fanning out, possibly 2-3 abreast, but Cherny holds on to the lead. It's Wingfield in second place. Paul Fernerhuff is held on to third. One appears to be I spoke too soon. There's collision in the mid-pack. 2, 3, 4 cars involved on the exit of the Elf S's. And a couple of cars dropping down. I think Andy Lees is one of them involved. Andy Curtis might be another, sadly. He was starting around the top 10. It looks like also Cottrell's in there too. So a few minor skirmishes and scrapes there as we see drivers losing positions already. But Jaroslav Cherny then goes out of Repsol corner towards Seat for the first time. And already Cherny has that very small advantage with Paul Fernerhuff climbing all over the back of James Wingfield. He almost hits the back of him as he turns into the left-hander down the hill. He gets hung out to dry on the exit with both Tom Willis and Andy Parker for company. Underneath the bridge towards the Verth S, which goes left and then right and then up towards Campsa corner for the very tricky fast right-hander that takes you onto that back straight towards the arguably the trickiest braking zone of all, that being Lakaisha Hairpin. Already, Chris, look at this first lap, and it's 5 of them dicing for second place, whilst Cherny puts his foot down and is already 2 seconds to good in front of the field.
Yeah, and this corner, like you say, is a tricky braking, and it's tight. It's tighter than you remember every single time you go round it, as Willis doesn't mind shoving his nose in there and does get up the inside. Wingfield drifted off wide there, and that's let Fernerhuff get through, so he's dropped down 2 spaces in that move there, in that one braking zone, just sort of highlighting how complicated and difficult it is. We've mentioned before that Wingfield can be a little bit inconsistent. I guess that just shows that with the pressure on there, just quick lock wheel, and that's the effect it can have.
So currently, the effect of being in the lead is giving Just Czerny, look at that, already a 2.5 second advantage. This is Jaroslav Czerny and Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull days we're watching, because there's quite a few similarities here between the two of them as they head out of the final corner of New Holland and onto this long pit straight. Now remember again, we talked about it several times, over and over, this magical half a second gap. There are 4 or 5 cars that are well within that half a second margin, and already they're going into combat down the straight as Wingfield looks to the inside to try and repass Fernhoff. They are going to bang wheels on the run towards Elf Corner. But somehow Wingfield tries to hold on. Fernhoff goes back around the outside, outbrakes Wingfield into the right-hander, gets the inside line for the next corner, but then Wingfield is back in front once more for the next corner in that sequence, and he too holds on as they turn up through the right-hander of Renault corner towards Repsol. But now look behind these two, you've also got in there Andy Parker, Emma Gisellings and Mark Bennett. And Bennett, meanwhile, of course, he was up there. He was in a great position before when we saw these guys racing at Zandvoort last time. And these 6 cars here behind Jaroslav Czerny. Also, these guys are one of these guys at the moment in this 5-car group as Tom Willis starts to break away from Jaroslav from the rest of the pack and sets off after Czerny. One of these 5 cars, Chris, unfortunately, if it stays as it is, they'll be quite disappointed because they'll be missing out on a qualification spot, whilst the others will go straight through.
I'm secretly quite glad that there are 7 cars out front here. Czerny has disappeared off, but I'm glad that there is that jeopardy, so they're going to have to work at keeping up. It looks like Gisellings had to just dropped off the back of that there. They've let Willis just escape slightly, haven't they, by having these battles, but bravo to both Paul Fernhoff and James Wingfield for not making contact. It looked for all the purposes like they would round turn 1, but they didn't, and it's still going at James Wingfield again losing out down to the braking into this really, really tight left-hander. Like I say, tighter than you imagine every single time. Mark Bennett now making great progress, pushing himself up the inside of Fernhoff, but Fernhoff's going to be still around the inside for the right-hander at the top of the hill.
Just an interesting point as well, of course, that the man that finds himself at the back of that queue every time might be a little bit of desperation sinking in, because he has to try and sit and bide his time on a battle that could take plenty more time, because we're only towards just under 21 minutes to go in this race. Look at them, 5 of them all together. This is 3rd down to 7th, so one of these 5 cars in this 5-car group as it is will have to miss out on a spot in the grand final race. At the moment, as it stands, it's Emma Gisellings, although James Wingfield that's under threat now as they come down the pit straight once again. So Czerny now leads by 3.1 seconds from Tom Willis, who has broken away from this pack, and it's Fernhoff 3rd, then Parker, Bennett, Wingfield and Gisellings, as quick as you can say it, down towards turn 1 on the start of lap 3. There's more side-by-side between Gisellings and the James Wingfield, and unfortunately Wingfield, who was at one point, of course, starting on the front row of the grid, has been shuffled all the way back down to the first non-qualifying spot. So not quite sure if these are I'm definitely sure that these first few couple of laps haven't really played out in James's favour or in the way he wanted them to. He's got to really dig deep now as he does get back past Gisellings. He's got to try and put at least one more car between himself and Gisellings if possible in order to try and ensure some kind of survival for the grand final next week.
We've had some good luck wishes from Enid Parker for Andy out front there. So yep, good luck, Andy. I'm sure you're not reading your Facebook messages right now because you're busy trying to get yourself through this melee. But Paul Fernhoff now made that little breakaway, and you can see that he's going to be chasing down Tom Willis. But at the moment, I'm sure he's just grabbed for the slight breath of fresh air that he's going to have and not having to deal with that pack of 6 cars.
So now on lap 3, just keeping an eye to see if this here Cardiff 81 is doing anything to try and close that gap on Czerny. At the moment, the answer is, unfortunately for Tom, no. He's putting himself into a very secure position to get himself a spot booked into the grand final. As we see here, in the background, you see Paul Fernhoff trying to make it past Andy Parker. Can't quite make that stick. Well, Fernhoff has made it stick. It's actually Mark Bennett who's trying to get past Andy Parker here. Just setting now again, wheel to wheel with James Wingfield, looking for the undercut as they go in towards the Europe car right-hander, and then the RACC chicane, and they're side-by-side into the first part. They're going to be downhill into the second sequence as they come to the left and the right. It's a very, very awkward back-to-front chicane, and can produce a great overtaking opportunity, or it can be very, very messy indeed, depending on if anyone wants to make a dive into this very short sequence of corners. Czerny then, fastest lap of the race, 2 minutes 5.576 as we go on to lap 4. Last Chance Saloon race in the caterhamracer.com Euro Winter Series. Top 6 in this race get the final 6 positions in the grand final grid. Who they're going to be is still got to be decided. Down towards turn 1, round the outside goes Wingfield to hold on from Gisellings, and again the outside line appears to be the braver and better line to go for. It works for him at this point in time as they go through turn 3, And Wingfield does indeed put his nose in front, and you'd like to think at the moment Christopher now has the advantage, but knowing how much these two have been battling so frantically, I wouldn't be so sure.
Yeah, it's not a big advantage, is it? It does seem like that outside line, just overall around that sequence of corners in this car, makes is the better line almost to hold on with. So yeah, you get the inside of the long right-hander, and that's just a management. You're just managing understeer all the way around that corner. So if you're hung out to dry on that corner, you're just going to end off in the scenery. So you know the inside of that corner sort of owns that sequence. So I think that's an interesting thing. We'll see whether Giselle can have a bit more pressure going in there. If he gets more of an overlap, then the outside line will become less viable for him at that point. But yeah, it's currently Wingfield just clinging on to that sixth place, that crucial sixth place for the qualification spot. But we have got that gap behind as Wingfield again drifts off wide, so giving Giselle that opportunity to sort of close up under braking. And we've seen that Wingfield's been a bit inconsistent on this braking zone into this tight left.
He's just trying to get that undercut if he can. He was hanging back just a little bit to try and sense any opportunity that Wingfield might have possibly outbraked himself or taken the wrong line. Just trying to look for any kind of opportunity, any crack in his defence to try and squeeze through if he can. But still, around this fairly quick 2.9 mile circuit where there is every kind of corner you can think of, just about, for those who race and test here. As we said, it is the perfect F1 test venue. Plenty of pre-season tests have come and go here, thanks not just the circuit, but also the ideal weather conditions in the winter. And pretty confident weather conditions are the last thing that's on James Wingfield's mind. One thing that's key, though, is trying to defend from this final qualification spot. So they come down the pit straight, and again, just selects on the outside line. Now, it does work on the outside if you've got the grip and also the confidence. He's got track position as well. Will be on the inside. It'll put him on the outside for the next corner for turn 2. Then for turn 3, it'll help him out on the long right-hander. So it does take advantage of the outside line and does get through. So he now goes up into its 6th position. Wingfield tries to put his nose up the inside again to reclaim the position, but Giselle is wise to it. And he is drifting wide, however, so back up the inside goes Wingfield, and they're going to be side by side again. The fact we've still got, we're not even at half distance yet, Chris, in a game like this, it makes me think that not quite sure we're done with this battle for maybe for quite some time by the looks of it. Yeah,
this could go the whole race, race length, and we've seen with Giselle, he's actually good at managing battles and does seem to maintain those battles for the whole of the race. But yeah, Wingfield back in charge after that kind of early again. Seeing Giselle sort of overtaking more and more, so maybe he has got that just slight advantage over James Wingfield, and James is obviously clinging on for all he's worth. Two cars side by side through that little chicane there is virtually unheard of, I'd say. It's great stuff.
He's not giving up. This is brilliant back and forth battling between these two, and he's providing with entertainment. And we are genuinely racing for something pretty important. It is that very last qualification spot. If it stays as it is, and these two are going to be battling over that position all race, he's going to be very happy. The other may be disappointed, as they just thinks, right, time for me to go around the outside to try and exert a little bit of authority. He's going to head into the little kink before Bank Sabadell, and at the inside again, and there's contact. They bump wheels. That's now pushed Wingfield wide, and I suspect possibly that might have brought their battle to, at the moment at least, a very premature end. Which is a shame, but I guess when they've been that close on track, Chris, not that I could see it coming, but at the same time, I guess something of that, a bump of that gravitude was probably something that was going to happen sooner or later. But I think the person that didn't really benefit from that was James.
Yeah, I think so. I think we could see that coming. It's so difficult to drive side by side like that. We also saw a little bit of variance in James's car, whereas it's sort of toing and froing a little bit. I think Giselle is letting James Wingfield back through. I was wondering if that would happen. Yeah. Just as a kind of apology for that, he has let James back and take his rightful place. And we do ask the drivers that if you do make contact with someone and cause them to leave the track, then you do return that favour as soon as you can. And that's exactly what we've seen there. So good driving all round. Just to review, sort of at the front there, they're all spreading out very slightly into their nice little comfortable 1 second gaps. So the top 5 there certainly comfortable. It's only this 6th and 7th place that, as we see Giselle again drifting wide, who are sort of having their ongoing battle. If you are on social media or if you're watching us live now, we would really appreciate you liking and subscribing virtually across all of our channels so that you get notifications when we go live. And certainly as we're coming towards the end of this season, it'd be great if you could subscribe, and that means that when we get to the new season, we can let you know immediately then when the new racing starts. And as you can see from the action tonight, it's pretty full on, and we'd love you to join in.
Indeed so, and of course I would presume that the next year's sort of initial season is going to be possibly that are similar to this, or maybe even going straight into next year's Caterham calendar, kind of as a bit of a parallel, or have we got something else that's going to keep us going between now and the spring?
The really early plan is to have a parallel series with the main Caterham Championships and maybe a few special races and events in between to fill the holes. But yeah, I think there might well be an early season sort of cup event or something like that to keep their drivers ticking over, and it's really good practice for those that are coming into sort of this new season's racing to get practice around tracks and things like that. So we do want to offer that as a service to all the drivers to help them out in their preparations.
Yeah, particularly when you've got drivers like not just James Moon but also Tom McEwing, two drivers of course who are going to next year's academy, and I know that even one or two drivers from this year's Caterham Motorsport Championships have been using the caterhamracer.com races as a little bit of extra virtual simulator practice to get themselves ready. And some drivers have actually commented they've seen the benefit, and it's been them to get a little bit of race car practice in where they might have not been able to otherwise. So it's good to see, and I'm pretty sure they'll be ready to go once more with a very impressive looking calendar, particularly for these 7 UK cars when they've got races going on on full Grand Prix circuits like the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit, Zandvoort, and even a season-ending pair of races at Spa-Francorchamps in October, which, I mean, given Spa-Francorchamps in October, but I don't get the words out, is usually wet at the best of times in the best case scenario in October. I dread to think, Chris, what your weather's going to be like when you turn up there. It's probably going to be even worse than that, I imagine.
It's one of those things, isn't it, where it can be wet any time you go to Spa, and regularly is. So I don't think it actually matters what time of the year. Maybe you just get a slightly higher percentage chance of getting damp. It's an epic track, and you take it whenever the dates come, don't you? And like I say, I think everyone, regardless of whether it's wet or dry, is going to be enjoying the challenge of getting around Spa, especially with for the 420s, the new wet tyres. Certainly that might be a good opportunity to see how they're going to get on.
Yeah, wet tyres that, according to one test driver, give so much grip no matter what he did to them in the wet conditions, the car just would not break grip. You've got some very soft but very grippy wet tyres that go right down to the tarmac, and they do provide plenty of grip. And there's, meanwhile, a spin that's happened just ahead of them, and that was, I think, Jay Shepherd and Mark Rodman. Rodman's definitely one of them as he's dropping down the order. Jay Shepherd, I think, might have been the other who got caught up in that, and they were relatively close on track together just a few moments ago when we were watching the cars in front of the likes of Steve Arnell and also James Moon. So it took a bit of incident there heading out of chicane on the approach to Campsa and pushed them down the order. As for the race order at the front, the important top 6 positions are still Jaroslav Cherny in the lead then by 5.3 seconds. Tom Willis in second position and still swung back a little bit. Improved pace for Paul Fernhoff. He gained 4/10 on Willis on that last lap and staying third. The gap is now 1.2 to 1.1 seconds and continues to decrease. Andy Parker fourth. Mark Bennett will get the qualification, one of the last qualification spots in fifth. And then James Wingfield is in sixth position. And he has got now a gap of 2.7 seconds over Emil Giselic. So after a little sort of tete-a-tete at the Bank Sabadell corner, where Giselic's backed off, it looks as though that Wingfield's managed to not only get himself in front, but pull enough of a gap in which Emil doesn't appear to be too much of a threat now, Chris. So Wingfield is, touch wood, relatively comfortable at the moment with 9.5 minutes to go get that final qualification spot. But someone who doesn't appear to be that comfortable is Andy Parker, because even though these two at the moment are guaranteed to go through, going to stop them being racers, is it? No,
that's going to be interesting to see how they manage this. Does Andy just let him go? Because we're seeing a little bit of rear end contact there even. So is it worth pushing so hard that might potentially have an accident? It's a really difficult choice to make, especially when you're in a comfortable position here. You've got nothing behind you for what is 7 seconds gap before James Wingfield pops along, so you really have got everything in the bag at the moment and nothing to gain from it. But yeah, very interesting to see Steve Arnell there back in 8th place. He clearly hasn't had a good start to this race, or didn't have a good start to this race, and is now suffering. He's probably hoping that these two maybe do have some contact, because with an 11-second gap to make up, I don't think that's going to happen in these final 8 minutes. We see here that Mark Bennett locked up trying to see whether he can get around the outside, but Andy Parker did a great job of defending that. Also nice to see James Moon there in 10th place. That's a really good jump up in the field. Obviously some consistency there, and like I say, it's really good to see the drivers on the sim get out there in real life when they and perform, which is we saw that last season. There was quite a good correlation between the drivers that did join the sim and enjoy the racing and those that sort of figured at the top of the sheets.
Yeah, I remember seeing the graphic that we put up. I think it was after Cadwell Park, I think it was, or one of the races where we had it showcased some of the achievements that those who competed in caterhamracer.com races, what they've managed to achieve over the caterhammotorsport.com subsequent week. So Caterham Motorsport subsequent weekend that took place after the races that were happening. We had something like 20, almost around like 15 to 20 drivers that at the very least took podiums or even race wins or fastest laps. So able to see that plenty of drivers who grace the Caterham Motorsport planet for real do use this as not only a bit of fun here to shake down and let loose and just enjoy themselves with their friends, but at the same time do use it as something of a tool, as a practicing utensil in order to try and pick up a bit more of an edge over their rivals, particularly around these virtual circuits that are put together so well. So 7.5 minutes to go, but try to stay up to Mark Bennett as he goes screeching up the inside and forcing like Andy Parker to run wide, which he does, and Parker puts two wheels onto the gravel as they come down towards Saat corner. But the pace advantage, at least off the corner, seems to be enough for Mark Bennett, and he's into fourth place. And I was going to say, trying to think two racing drivers not to race each other, it's like trying to tell a dog to leave a plate of food alone. He's got good intentions, but he's not going to leave it alone if he's left unattended, and certainly can't resist himself. So these two certainly couldn't resist having a quick scrap. Of course, it's now worked in Bennett's favour, and he'll be hoping now, touch wood, that with 6 3/4 minutes to go, doesn't have the same sort of fortune that he had back at Zandvoort, which I'm pretty sure, Chris, the race evening this time last week, that he would rather want to forget.
Yeah, he's had a bit of unfortunate ends to a few races, and he's just finished outside of the qualifying positions. So Ferneyhoff here now making that ground up against Willis. So again, he's got that same decision to make as to, does he just sit there because he's probably not under attack from 4.5 seconds behind him? Does he just sit there, or does he want to take that position? I think Ferneyhoff, he's finished just a single place outside qualifying, and thinking at least 2 rounds, if not 3. So I'm sure he's firmly set on just get to the end of this race, live out these last 6 minutes without making a mistake, because he drifts very wide onto that green. You can see how loose the rear end of the car gets when you're drifting out that wide.
Very evenly matched lap times there between Willis and Ferneyhoff, and Willis was ever so slightly quicker as he puts in a personal best that time around. The gap is about 0.7 per second, so Ferneyhoff's not within that magical half a second range in order to make that happen. But just locking up there just shows that he's still pushing on as hard as he ever is. And I guess the question's really got to be, Chris, putting yourself into this scenario, of course, if you're Tom Willis, if you've got Paul Ferneyhoff right behind you, but you know that you've got you're kind of in two minds, you know that you've got a qualification spot in hand here. The rest of the car behind have fallen back by several seconds, so even if he made a very small mishap, you're not going to lose too much. As we're watching here, looks like Mark Rodman and James Moon going side by side. That's a scrap over 10th place in the run towards turn 1. Moon's got the inside line, and I think he's going to try and hold on ahead of Rodman as they continue to run parallel on the braking zone towards Elf into the right-hander, and Moon stays in front. But so, whilst yes, you've got a secure place, you got to think, does the sensible part of you think, I don't need to race, do I let him go? Or does the racer part of you go, I'm here to try and get as best result as I can? Yes, I'm in a qualifying spot, but second is still second and third is still third. So there has to be a bit of a decision made in the cockpit pretty quickly as to what to do. Do you try and attack and go for the position? Or do you just sit there and think, I don't need to try and compromise my race, I'm exactly where I need to be, let's just take it to the flag and book the place as the final. Decisions can vary driver by driver, can't they?
Exactly that. I was going to say exactly that, Scott. It's different drivers approach situations in very different ways, and there's an argument for all sorts of different approaches there. Now, if you get the person looking at the bigger picture, then sitting where Paul Ferneyhoff is now is absolutely fine, and you just have to live it out. You're not going to gain anything by making up that place. You've only got a chance to lose. But nevertheless, other people don't like backing off and easing up, because actually it takes away that sharpness, and therefore you can start making mistakes because you're attacking or coming from a slightly slower angle or a different angle to what you might expect. And so there's other mentality of just absolutely keep pressing forward at all costs, and eventually things will come good. But yeah, I think if it was me sat where Paul is now, I would be happy where I was. I might even give myself a slightly bigger gap and just get to the end of this race. Like I say, there's nothing to gain from it, as we see Willis taking a very wide line there into turn 1. Yeah.
So 3.5 minutes to go then before the race comes to a conclusion, as Wingfield has done enough, it seems, at the moment to that last qualifying spot as 3 seconds or so ahead now of Emma Giselic, and the man who started on the front row of the grid, further back in 6th, still doing everything he needs to just about keep that holding on. There might be a small battle developing potentially for over 4th position if Andy Parker can get back onto the tail of Mark Bennett, although it might be a little bit too much for Andy by the looks of it if Mark can continue on his merry way here. And they turn in through the long left-hander and back on the power again to make the short run down towards the left-hander here. And Parker then running one of the livery that was formerly raced by William Smith a couple of years ago, former champion in his own rights in Caterham racing, of course, and stepped up to the 40.
And returning next year, I believe. So I think Will Smith is returning to the 420 grid, which would be great to see him back with looking at the new machinery and all the new challenges that will have for him.
There are quite a few, returning names who've been racing 420Rs, not last year, but this year, but the last maybe 2 or 3 seasons that have been in it on and off, that are starting to just poke their head round the door of the spot of the new 420R regulations, and they're just, well, 7 UK regulations, they're just sort of intent into coming back and having a go. So it's good to see some more familiar names as well that are looking to jump back in. I've even seen at one point I saw on Facebook that a certain Jack Sales was also quite intrigued by the new rules, although that his car, in terms of its paint scheme, has been driven by James Moon, so it's going to 11th place behind Mark Robin. So that car's been put into good use at the moment to potentially get a top 10 spot if you can catch up to the back of Mark Robin again. But now a minute and a half to go on the clock here to decide exactly who finishes where in these top 6 positions. These guys here are probably just having a race here just for the sake of it, to have fun here. This is Gavin Bolton on the back of Mike Hilton. And then we've got Mark Lipitsky and Jim Erlo having a scrap, and a nice fair change of positions there. Bolton had the inside line, and Mike, in a very British way, went kind of, well, after you, Gavin. Through you go. No contact in a very gentlemanly aspect. So you don't normally see that much gentlemanly racing going on in Caterhams, but certainly got it there in the sim version, didn't we? Yeah,
we see Mike making some really good progress, and with his sim racing over time, and I'm sure he's looking forward to his road sports season and getting really stuck in there. It's sort of all settled itself down, apart from these battles that are taking place at the end, but it just shows how far down the order the battles do continue all the way through these races. But with only 47 seconds to go now, I think we should probably show a little bit of Churdy on the stream. He has been imperious again, hasn't he?
I think that's a good idea, given the fact that, bless him, he has been out in front and pretty much done nothing wrong but just dominate at the front of the field. So, as the saying goes, meanwhile, back at the ranch, he's continuing to dominate this race, 7.3 seconds to the good. Reason why he was, I'm going to get this right now, he was champion in season 2 in the 420Rs, so by quite a margin. So must have certainly proven why he's been running at champion status. He comes up through the final chicane for what should be the last time with 10 seconds to go. In fact, the clock will tick to 0 by the time he gets through the final corner. And the saying goes is that he came, he saw, and he conquered. And he's not only conquered season 2 of the caterhamracer.com series, but now he's jumped into the Euro Winter Series and driven like he's never been away. He heads out of the final turn, and in a rather beneficial cameo appearance, he will cross the line, take the checkered flag, and not only win the Last Chance Saloon race, but he also books that spot into the grand final as well. He's also joined by Tom Willis, who picks up 2nd place, and Paul Ferdinand in 3rd. Mark Bennett does make it through after his heartbreak at Zandvoort. 5th will go to Andy Parker, and then just watching back in 7th place, Emma Jelic has to watch James Bingfield take the 6th and final qualification spot, which decides the top at the 18 runners that will take the start at the grand final. So across the line for the rest of the field, Jelic was 7th, Steve Arnell, very lonely 8th position, but he makes it through for a fairly strong result. 9th and 10th come through the final couple of corners now. This is Jay Shepherd on his own, current Fun Cup racer, former TVR Tuscan racer as well. So proving his worth in 9th. 10th place goes to Mark Rodman. 11th goes to James Moon, at least it should do. He's under threat from Alan Curtis here across the line. And James puts in a very impressive 11th on his first night in 420Rs. Really good effort from one of next year's Academy drivers, possibly showing a bit of glimpse of what we could see next year. Then it's Jim Erlen and Mark Lipitsky. Gavin Bolton, who made that pass on Mike Hilton. Well, the last few cars across the line now with Stephen Boyles. And it's Paul Hawker and Clark. In fact, Paul Hawker's the last car across the line, in fact, because we had 2 cars in the pits and 2 cars at DNF from that one. We had 22 starts and 18 taking the flag at the end. So the top 6 in the race decides, as we mentioned, the final 6 pieces of the puzzle for the Euro Winter Series Grand Final grid, and they are as follows. First to sixth, it's Jaroslav Czerny, who books his spot into that Grand Final race next week at Nürburgring, and he's also joined by fellow podium finishers Tom Willis and Paul Fernie. After the winning margin for Czerny with 7.6 seconds in the end, showing just why he's a champion from before. Mark Bennett fourth, Andy Parker fifth, and James Wingfield, despite starting on the front row of the grid and being up and down in all sorts of the top six positions behind Jaroslav, still manages P6 and beats Emil Jaselenk to sixth position to also get himself into the last car on the grid. Seventh place was to Emil Jaselenk, eighth for Steve Arnell, ninth for Jay Shepherd, and 10th goes to Mark Rodman. 11th to James Moon, a very impressive run on his first go in one of the main broadcast races. James Moon. 12th for Alan Curtis, 13th for Jim Earlham, 14th for Mark Lipitsky, 15th for Gavin Boulton, 16th for Mike Hilton, and it's Stephen Boyles and Paul Hawker. And the only cars we didn't see make the flag were Philip Clark and Andy Lees, or two being Ben Buckley and Adam Cottrell. So there we have it, Chris. Our 18-strong Grand Final grid is now decided, and I think, to be fair, in many cases, in that Last Chance Saloon race, there's not really any drivers in the top six that I expected, that I didn't expect to be in there, to be fair. So I think all six drivers are in there, are drivers that, looking at their pace and how they've worked over the last few races and what they've done previously, are pretty much, I would class as the usual suspects, given those that were away today and those that are usually sort of around their positions, if you don't count those that are regularly front runners. Yeah,
absolutely. I think I'd agree with that. The only person that I think is going to be pretty disappointed there is Steve Arnell back in 8th place. He's been running consistently well throughout the season. I guess he just got caught up just by not having such a good qualifying. He just got caught up in those early battles and has drifted to 8th. So he's not going to make an appearance on that Grand Final, which I'd say he'll be disappointed with that. But like you say, it's hard to see beyond the main results tonight. The cars that we kind of expected to be there were, as you said, and they put on a great race. They kind of spread themselves out, but at the beginning it was absolutely tooth and nail, wasn't it? It was like an angry swarm of bees going at each other. But yeah, they kind of came out on top in the order that we might expect.
I think you mentioned that Andy Parker is not likely to make the Grand Final. Is that correct?
There's a couple of drivers that might struggle to make that final. We will find that out over the coming days. And the finishing order. So Jaselenk in 7th and Arnell in 8th. Potentially, if someone doesn't make the Grand Final or can't make it, then they could still get up their spots in that way. But I know that Arnell would have wanted to grab it, straight up.
They were kind of on, I guess, Underhook's non-reserve duty, waiting to see if a couple of drivers do drop out so they can get in. So it'll be intense for them, I'm sure, to wait. But I guess for the second to last time, before we obviously sign things off for 2020, what the crazy year it's been, it's time for Chris once again to have another virtual one down the pit lane. So I'm sure he'll don his headset and his microphone and go and have a chat. So as we like to say, the drivers will be in the mix to see if we can have a chat to who finished where. So again, off you go and see who we can find in our virtual pit lane as we hopefully have a chat to some of our drivers in the top six.
It looks like quite a few of the drivers have legged it away for an early shower. But James, I hope you've got us in the commentary box.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm still here.
Great. So, not a comfortable night's racing for you, right? It's certainly a great qualifying. So that must have been pretty pleased to get that one put out right at the end of qualifying. But then in the race, generally slipping back, but hung on into that 6th place in the qualifying.
Yeah, last qualifier from the last chance race, so that's cutting it fine, I guess, by anyone's book. But yeah, I was so happy with qualifying. That was miles quicker than I've ever gone round here before, so I timed that one perfectly and just managed to hook up a good lap. But it did sort of put me slightly out of position in the race, so it was a case of holding my line, keeping my car pointing the right way, and not getting overly aggressive with some of the quicker guys coming through.
I think you've probably used most bits of tarmac now at Barcelona. You were side by side with a couple of those guys all the way throughout the lap, I think.
Yeah, I had a good few side by sides. I think Emil was a bit unlucky. I think he actually probably lifted to let me back through because there was a little bit of contact as he went past me.
Yeah,
and he let me pass down the straight. And I think he just kind of dropped back out of the toe. And at that point, I managed to stay in front. So that was very fair by him. But fortunately for me, it kept me in 6th place, I guess. But yeah, it was a little bit of a lonely finish to the race, but huge pressure still.
So there you go. Qualify for the Grand Final. So hopefully you can make it and race with us next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I guess from where I've qualified, I've got everything to gain, haven't I? So anything's going to be a good result.
Absolutely, it's a race like any other. So if you can put another qualifying performance in like that, then who knows what's going to happen.
Well, that's the plan. Yeah, that is the plan, definitely. I have to say, I get on quite nicely with the Academy. The 420, I've been struggling a little bit more with the setup on it and just getting the driving style. But maybe that qualifying lap was a bit of a turning point for me. We'll see.
Great. Well, we'll see you next week then, and good luck.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks again, guys, for doing such a great job with the stream and generally the whole organisation. So I look forward to racing in the final next week.
Excellent stuff. Cheers, James. And then again with a reduced field, Andy Parker as well. We'll find out if he's available to chat to us. And let's see. So Andy, have you got us in the commentary box? I'm not sure Andy's there. Just give him a second, just in case he is around. Nope. So that might be our lot for the night, because the other people will be disappointed in having missed out. So I think it wouldn't be fair to sort of rub their noses in that.
I guess that is a fair presumption of the situation, I think. So just let them go and drown their sorrows a little bit, unless there's one or two drivers just behind the top six that might also get a chance to pop up as well. So, of course, we are getting very close now, of course, to the end of what's effectively now coming up to, incredibly, a whole season's worth of racing that we've had at caterhamracer.com. Of course, ever since things came together, I think it's fair to say slightly unexpectedly, given the global circumstances, but of course there is hope on the horizon now with certain developments going on. Of course, things are getting a bit tougher now in the UK as we head towards kind of well-known time of the year in many cases. But I think it's incredible the fact that we had 23 drivers out for this race for the Last Chance Saloon race. 23 drivers for 6 spots. It really did have a very much like a Formula 4 Festival Last Chance race style vibe to it, and certainly plenty of good racing, which befitted the occasion as well. But of course, one more race to go now with the grand final. We know at least the top 12, at least the majority, if not almost all of the drivers that are qualified for it. I know it's a bit of a tough prediction to try and make, if any, but what are you expecting from the Nürburgring, of course, for the grand final? Of course, there is going to be the big braking zone at turn 1. It's a quite narrow but fast and flowing circuit. These are the 12 cars that have already qualified prior to tonight. We'll add the other 6 names in once we get to the Nürburgring, based on once we know who's doing what. But we'll quickly give it a rundown. David Rowe, Will Rossetti, Steve McMaster were the first 3 drivers that booked their place at Brands Hatch. Then it was back at Zolder, it was Christian Zaruta, Jensen Hassler and Richard Gallagher. At Estoril, it was James Murphy, Martin Buchan and Blair McConaughey. And then last time at Zandvoort, it was Guy Crawford, James Fowler and Tom McEwing. And of course, we've booked in our 6 final drivers, including, of course, the race winner, Jaroslav Cherny. If you can try and summarise it or try and make some kind of prophecy as to what can happen, just what, if anything, are you expecting from next week at the Nürburgring? Because there's so many top drivers in the mix there. It's probably going to be like a typical 420R race. The fact that there's quite a lot on the line in terms of winning the Winter Euro Series going to make it, I'm sure, even more tougher for these guys to one, not only to get a good qualifying, and 2, to make the most of it during the race and to keep out of trouble. So this is going to be a pretty intense contest for the final race of the season. I
think only a fool would try and call this race. It's really hard because this season we haven't seen them all kind of racing together consistently. They've had sort of weeks on, weeks off. So it's going to be great actually just to see them all on that one grid together and seeing how they got on with it. It's not a track that we've raced an awful lot on the sim. So there'll be some people who've got a bit more experience than others, but it's not something we've raced on stream before. So that's a good angle. But when we've in all the sort of top qualifiers, Rowe, Murphy, and we saw tonight with Cherny, they've all kind of dominated their races and pulled away to big leads, and therefore it's going to be interesting shoving them all on one grid together and seeing how they get on. Now, if I was a betting man, depending on, again, subject to them and being able to attend the thing, I think Murphy's shown some incredible pace recently and some consistency to go along with that. And Cherny is never, you can't ever disregard him because he's just so consistent. But yeah, I think if I was going to place a bet and he, on this, I would put it on Murphy to come out victorious.
Yeah, it's a tough one to crack, isn't it? But these guys will certainly give it their all as much as they can. But Just a reminder in terms of when it comes up, and of course it is this time next week. As you can see, we've had the first 5 races. The big one is all set now, just about. Nürburgring Grand Prix, the grand final, 29th of December. Last racing from caterhamracer.com. What's been pretty, well, I don't want to say mental, but it's been pretty unfathomable 2020 season. It's been really a year like no other, and I guess really to sign off again, it's been a tricky year for many people, but I think the fact that we've had so much support as we've had, and I know we'll talk about this at the season finale next week as well before we sort of properly close things out. But the fact we've had so much support as we've had, Chris, and the fact that you put something together that's actually inspired quite a few people, not just in the catering paddock, but those who circulate around it and just outside it, to get them involved has been incredible.
Yeah,
and with only one race to go, it almost seems a shame like it has to end in many cases, because we've had arguably 3 quite entertaining seasons worth of racing, and I think given the appetite for many races in the paddock, we're not quite done just yet.
No, I think we'll see some more, and great support, like you said, from all the drivers, from people around the paddock, and from our sponsors who help us put these broadcasts together.
Yeah, indeed. And so let's just give a thanks, of course, to DPR Motorsport, and also to FPZERO Simulators, and to Just Add Lightness, who do high performance LED lights and accessories for the Caterham 7, as well as design and display structures, and also Darren Burke, driver performance coach as well. Thank you to all of them for all of their support so far. And I guess we'll sign off by saying, of course, next time you'll see us will be after one of the biggest days of the year. We'll say is that, you know, given this restrictions, depending where you are in the world, not just in the world, but in the UK in particular, that some people will find towards the end of this week quite tough. It's going to be quite tricky given the new restrictions in place. But if you are someone who is possibly going to be struggling a bit, just please look after yourself, because it might be tricky now, but of course things will get better, and there are signs that it's getting better. There is definite light at the end of the tunnel. Things will improve as things go on, and hopefully by the time we get to spring, if not even the summer, things like this will be a distant memory. But until then, however you're choosing to spend it, and whoever you're choosing it with, if anyone, of course there are some people who might be unfortunate to spend it on their own, please do have a safe and as enjoyable and as happy a Christmas as you can have, and we'll see you, of course, after that for the racing in between, of course, Christmas and New Year. The last racing caterhamracer.com of 2020, the finale of the Winter Euro Series at the Nürburgring. It's going to be quite a cracking race to see out what's been a rather unprecedented year, but even so, we'll put on some great entertainment to put a smile on your face one last time. So from myself, Scott, and Chris, and from all our sponsors as well, DPR, FPZERO Simulators, Just Add Lightness, Design Display Structures, and Darren Burke, Performance Coach, and everyone who's involved, thank you for watching. Please, however you can, enjoy Christmas, have a great day, and we'll see you next time for the season ender, which is where we find out who wins the Winter Euro Series and who wins the final. 18 cars and one final 25-minute race around the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit. Who comes out on top? We'll have to tune in next week to find that one out. But until then, stay safe, have a great Christmas, and we'll see you next week for the final rounds here on caterhamracer.com. Bye for now.
Happy Christmas.